Hi, this is Mashno, and here I have again a chess video for those who want to study chess seriously. So no adrenaline rushing blitz or bullet games here, but just chess study to improve your game. So we're going to do the 20 minutes exercise again. So I'll open the database and choose a game here. Let's see, Rajabov Carlson. There we go. And now I'm going to move until a moment in the middle game where there are no captures and no forced moves. Perhaps this is a good moment after knight to f4. So it's Rajabov to move with white here against Magnus Carlsen, and we're going to think for 20 minutes about this position. I'll put the timer on that I have here. Okay, like that. Good. Let's have a look at the position. Both kings are safe, although this knight on f4, no, it's not threatening the white king. Okay. Material. Both have a queen, 2 rooks, 2 late pieces, and 7 pawns. So the material is equal. There are, of course, some imbalances. One of them is a double pawn of white. But on the other hand, this double pawn, the pawn on f5, is not that bad. It controls e6 and g6. That's interesting. Now one of the pieces of white looks a bit bad placed. That's the knight on h2. And we have two, well, actually one open file and one semi-open file. The open file is the d file. So let's see what could be a good plan for white here. Of course, we could try to have more influence on the center by doubling the rooks on the e file, or trying to control the d file by playing rook a1 to d1. Black's last move was knight to f4. We have, I think, different options. One of them could be what I just said, try to have more influence in the center by playing rook a to d1. Another one could be to improve the position of our worst piece, and that's the knight on h2. So we could play knight from h2 to g4. Then, if black would take the knight, then we could retake with queen. Our bishop on c2 is also not really well placed. Well, it controls e4, so it's preventing the advance of the e-pawn, the black e-pawn. And the knight on f4, the black knight is only defended by this pawn on e5. That's interesting, because perhaps there is some tactics. Rook takes e5, rook takes e5, rook, queen takes f4. No, just losing the exchange for one pawn, and not more than that. What is a good move here? What's a good plan? Now, trying to increase the pressure on the e5 pawn would be by playing, for example, rook to e3 followed by rook a to e1. If we play rook to e3, black could play the knight from f6 to d5, attacking the rook. So I think this doubling up the rooks on the e file is not really something that's easily accomplished. Now taking away the square d5 for the knight by playing c4 is not very handy, since we will restrict even more the mobility of the bishop, the light square bishop of white, by placing a pawn on a light square. So that's not something that I am very happy about. Now what happens after rook a to d1? Rook a to d1, then the queen on d8 is attacked. The queen will probably go either to e7 or c7. e7 looks... I think c7 is a better place, since if it moves queen to e7, then it will be on the same line as my rook on e1. So then all kind of tactics can be used. Not directly, but I think safer is queen to c7. And then he's preparing to bring his rook from a8 to d8. Rook a to d1, queen c7, and then this open file is not easy to use. This open d file, even if we have this rook on the d file, it's not easy to enter into black's position. So I wonder if this is improving white's position or not. Of course, we could also go a bit in a crazy plan by advancing the pawns on the king side. Play g4, g5, well, g4, h4, g5. Try to blast open the defense of the black king. But that's not really something that can be done immediately, I think, because we miss some rooks on the g and h file to have really power to attack there. On the other hand, it could help us to, after g5, let's fantasize. If we would have two pawns, one on h4 and one on g4, we could play g5, then h takes g5, h takes g5. The knight on f6 would have to move from there, and that would mean that we could play eventually f6, opening the diagonal for the c2 bishop, but it doesn't lead to anything directly. So I'm not sure if this attack would have any future. Now the improvement, that was the other possible plan, the improvement of the worst position of worst piece, I mean, of white. Well, there are actually two options. One already mentioned, rook a to d1, and the other one is to improve the position of the h2 knight by playing knight to g4. After knight to g4, we threaten to take on e5. We don't need to be worried about this pawn advancing, because then the knight on f4 hangs. So after knight to g4, most probably black will want to trade that knight, because otherwise it would have to move something like knight from f6 to d7 to defend the e5 pawn. So he will be blocking his own queen, so then we would play rook a to d1, pinning the knight, and that would look better for us. So I think after knight h2 to g4, black will take on g4. Let's see, knight to g4, knight takes g4. Is h takes g4 something? Not really, huh? We cannot use this open h file that easy. So queen takes g4, and then we would need perhaps, or we could do then a rook lift, rook e1 to e3 to g3, and have attack on g7. That could open some perspectives. Let's see. Knight to g4, knight takes g4, queen takes g4. It's black to move then. Let's say he wants to activate his piece. Well, he could enter with his queen to d2, attacking the bishop on c2. Oh, wait a minute. That's a counter from black that I hadn't seen until now. So after knight g4, knight takes g4, queen takes g4, queen d2. And then we could play a rook to e2. No, we cannot, because the knight is on f4. So we would have to, if we move the bishop to b3, then queen takes b2. Doesn't look very well. I think it's necessary first to play then first rook a to d1 to control the d2 square. If black plays queen to c7, then I would like to play my knight from h2 to g4. Knight takes g4, queen takes g4, with the idea of playing queen e1 to e3 and then to g3. Another idea then could be also to chase away the knight from f4. So that means that after the whole variation, knight to g4, knight takes g4, queen takes... again, rook to d1 first, queen c7, knight to g4, knight takes g4, queen takes g4. If then rook a to d8, then perhaps we could play g3. This knight would have to go to d5. Now, the counterpart about this g3 move is that the rook lift, rook e1, e3, g3 doesn't work. But we could play f6 then. Oh, that's interesting. After g3, knight e5. Oh no, then he's guarding f6. So instead of g3, play f6. The queen, in this idea, the queen could be on c7. So that means that perhaps it's better for black not to play the queen to e7, but to... I'm sorry, not to c7, but to e7, to prevent the move f6. So that means that the whole variation would change into rook a to d1, queen to e7. Can I use this pinned e pawn at the moment? No, not really. Queen takes f4 is nothing. Okay, so rook d1, queen e7, knight g4, knight takes g4, queen takes g4, and then rook a to d8. And at that point we cannot play f6 because of queen takes f6. So at that point we would... Let's evaluate that position actually, because in that position we would have both rooks active on these open files. The queen will be on g4, and the knights on f6 and on h2 would have been traded. So that means that black would have active pieces and white also. Now, in comparison with the position that we have right now, our knight on h2 is inferior to the one on f6, in my opinion. So it wouldn't be bad to trade those. This looks like a logical thing. Let's see, I still have 6 minutes, so let's see if we can find something else. If it would be now the moment to move, I would choose rook a to d1 followed by knight to g4, but let's see if we can find something else. Perhaps there's something more in the position. Playing g3 right now is not good, because then the knight takes on h3 with check. So do we have anything else? I mean, the first move must be rook a to d1. Rook a to d1. Queen e7. Do we have anything else at that moment? Could we then try to double up the rooks on the e file? So after queen to e7, play rook to e3. Now then, just like in the earlier variation, then comes a knight to d5. And what if we play c4 to have control of this d5 square, prevent a knight entering there? So rook a to d1, queen to e7, and then c4. With the idea of continuing with rook from e1 to e3, and then the rook from d1 to e1, putting pressure on e5. Looks interesting. The question is only if this pawn from c3 goes to c4, will it be good, or will it have a big disadvantage later if black fixes this pawn by playing c5, for example? And I would be terrible if a knight on d4 would appear at some point. So the pawn on c3 is important to control d4. I'm not sure. The problem with the move c3 to c4 in any variation is that the control over the squares d4 is gone. So that means that we have to be totally sure that it's impossible for black to later have a knight on d4. And I think we cannot be sure of that, because we don't have a dark square bishop. We only have a knight that could try to control d4 by placing it on f3, but it would lead to a defensive strategy. So I'll stick with my original idea. Well, not the original idea, but one of the ideas that I mentioned. So playing rook a to d1, and later playing the knights from h2 to g4, trade those knights, and the position will be improved a bit then, because of the trade of those two knights and the control over this d2 square, so the black queen cannot enter there any longer. Yeah. Okay, let's have a look at the time. My timer says that only 2 minutes are left, so I'll just stop here, because I cannot think of anything else now. Well, let's use these 2 minutes to see if this crazy idea of advancing the kingside pawns is something. So to play h4, followed by g4 and g5. h4, queen d2, problem. So first rook a to d1, queen e7, and then h4. So that's something. Then probably knight from f6 to d5, attacking with the pawn on h4 with the queen from e7. So g4 doesn't work anymore, and I need to defend this pawn on h4 in that variation. So now this doesn't work. Okay, I'll stick to my move rook a to d1, and I'll stop the timer now after 19 minutes. Okay, and let's see what happened in the game then. Next move of white is rook a to d1. Okay, queen to c7. Okay, so he didn't go to e7. Knight g4 followed. Okay, oh, I was on the right track. That's good. So then, okay, he didn't trade the knights, but he played knight to h5. Interesting. Rook e3. So that has the option of rook d to e1, but also rook e3 to d3. Then he took, and he took with pawn. Why took with pawn? Okay, because he wins the tempo now by attacking the knight on h5, and perhaps this h-file can be used, but I'm not sure about that. Knight f6, queen to g3, pinning the pawn on e5 and preparing g5. So that's, oh, this is funny, because this also has the idea of advancing the pawns on the king side. Rook to d8 was played, rook to e1, putting more pressure on the e5 pawn. Rook d2, bishop b3, queen to d8. So of course, if black would have taken on b2, then we can take on e5. But we can take still on e5 now. Now g5 was played. H takes, queen takes, knight goes here, queen to the h-file, threatening rook e3 to h3. But what if knight takes e3? Or then queen takes f7. Queen takes some check, king goes to the h-file, and then rook from e1 to e3 takes e3, followed by rook to h3, checkmate. So queen f6 played, rook to h3, threatens mate on h8, queen to f8, I'm sorry, king to f8, queen g4. Now he wants probably to give a check with a rook at the back rank. King goes to g8. Oh, and here we get a repetition, move repetition. Yeah, this is what happened, move repetition, and a draw was agreed here. So that means that Rajabov didn't see a possibility to continue the attack. Now what I want to do is, actually the exercise is already over now, so this is just extra. Now what I want to do is to put the Fritz engine on now. Engine goes on to have a look. Rook a to d1, this move. And what about queen to e7 actually? What does Fritz think about? Okay, at the moment, after a few seconds thinking, he says that queen to e7 is the best move. Now it changes, queen to a5, and on the second place queen to e7, on the third place queen to c7. Okay, so that means that both moves, queen to e7 and queen to c7, they're both good moves, but Magnus Carlsen chose for queen to c7. Queen to c7, knight g4, best move. And here, I'll go back here, the computer says that knight takes g4 was better, and it gives us a variation: knight takes e4, queen takes g4, queen to e7. So the queen is at that moment well placed on e7 to prevent f6. That's the idea that I had during the exercise. So, well, this was played. Take, h takes, queen g3. Okay, and then bishop to b3. Yeah, there was the position evaluation is constantly equal, and that's because black has enough defensive resources against this attack. So here's how the game ended. Okay, well, interesting exercise. I hope you enjoyed looking at this, and if you want to improve your chess, do this exercise as much as possible, because it's really a way to train yourself to think properly during your own chess games, analyzing, having a look at the characteristics of the positions, the imbalances, and then making a plan, and after that, only after that, start calculating. Alright, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time on YouTube. Goodbye.